Okay, this might be really dramatic, making a video about quote-unquote what really happened with the Canucks and Miller and the Penguins and all this stuff at the trade deadline. But it is easier to go out there and make a video like this on Streamlabs rather than the regular Adobe Audition whatever, because we could switch easily between tabs and I don't have to keep on screenshotting everything and putting it on the screen for you. Plus, I think that this is a lot more of a digestible sort of thing if we make it in this format. So today, we are talking once again about the Vancouver Canucks and JT Miller, and what, according to Frank Seravalli, might have actually happened between the Canucks and the Penguins, involving a Miller trade in and of itself. So, Frank Seravalli had himself a radio hit on Sportsnet 650 from yesterday, and there were a bunch of quotes from Seravalli that were making its rounds on social media. This is kind of why we wanted to make this video here today. Seravalli says yesterday that the Canucks were ready, willing, and eager to move JT Miller at the trade deadline. He also says, though, that they were discussing a number of picks and prospects in different scenarios. Ultimately, the Penguins didn't make an official offer. Now that is really intriguing, because we know that Patrik Allvin said after the trade deadline concluded that he did not receive any formal, legitimate offers, quote-unquote, for Miller. And a lot of us, myself included, were like, hey, that's cap. Like, bro, it had been reported for weeks. Y'all were talking about moving Miller. What do you mean you got no offers for the guy? And Seravalli is going out there and pretty much confirming what it was that Allvin said. The Penguins didn't make an official offer. And, you know, it boils down to semantics at this point, but I do kind of understand where Seravalli is coming from. The Canucks and the Penguins were discussing different assets like picks and prospects and things, but the Penguins apparently did not officially say, all right, here, this is what we are trying to give you for Miller. This is what we'll offer you in exchange for Miller. They were just kind of saying, okay, well, what if we gave you this? What if we gave you that? No official, all right, here's the paper transaction. If you sign it, you get the guy and the trade is done. Nothing like that. You also had yourselves another tweet made by Canucks House. I listened to the entire bit on 650. It was good. Basically, number one, it feels like the Canucks are open to moving Miller before his no-move clause kicks in for the right price. Two, there is a market for Miller. And number three, there was no deal on the table. They talked far enough that something may happen closer to the draft. And you know, this is all fine and dandy. It's good to see this happen and be the case, but at the same time, it doesn't really feel all too productive, in my opinion, for the Penguins to be making a trade for Miller after the trade deadline unless they're super confident that Malkin, Crosby, Letang, and the like are going to be still sticking around for next season and beyond. I feel that because of the nature of this season and how those players are right now, it would have been more appropriate to have really went all balls to the wall and tried to have gotten Miller earlier on. Now, I know you got Mikael Granlund, I know there were some other moves made by this team, but trying to add on JT Miller after the fact seems like a more afterthought-ish kind of process, and it doesn't really feel like something that I think would have been all too smart to consider, considering the timeline of how everything aligns. Seravalli even said that he wanted to correct himself from earlier in the season where he said the Canucks would have a tough time moving off of the Miller contract. Other teams were internally considering JT. The UFA market is weak for impact players, so there's going to be trades. Now, what exactly is Seravalli talking about? Well, earlier on in the season, we had ourselves this article from March 2nd, 2023 on dailyfaceoff.com. 6 salary cap agenda items that will drive the action on the NHL's trade deadline day. If you scroll down to the Miller conversation and you see this right here, this is what it says at this point, so from about a week ago. It seems like a real long shot that the Canucks will move Miller prior to Friday afternoon's deadline. Miller's name has surfaced in trade talks, but the Canucks wanted to secure a young center as a replacement before considering moving him. They were also asking for 2 first-round picks in return, or a first and a prospect. Miller's 7-year, $56 million contract extension kicks in on July 1st. His no-trade clause kicks in that day too, making the time of the essence in this offseason if Vancouver actually does want to move on before losing some control in the matter. If Miller does somehow end up moving before the 3 o'clock Friday trade deadline, do not expect Vancouver to retain salary on him. Even though Miller is in the final season of his contract with a 5.25 AAV, if the Canucks were to retain on that, the same percentage retained would also carry over to the next contract as well, the 8 years and, or not the 8 years, the $8 million 7-year deal. That would be unpalatable in Vancouver as they're still looking to create cap flexibility that they crave. And so, all things considered, Seravalli's kind of going a little back on his word here. Initially, he said that it would be tough to move JT and that they're asking for 2 firsts and a first and a prospect or a young center. And, you know, honestly, asks are asks. I'm going to go out there and say that 2 first-round picks is not unreasonable for a guy that got 99 points last year. And when you talk about some other teams like Carolina, for example, they're a team that was reportedly wanting a center with term. Well, JT ended up getting term. You talk about the New York Islanders, they got Bo Horvat, they signed him to a long freaking deal, $8 million, or not $8 million, 8 years, $8.5 million per season. So there are teams that want players that have term, and JT Miller is one of the ones that does have term. It's just going to be interesting to see where these other teams, like Pittsburgh specifically, end up going with these Miller conversations. If this price of 2 firsts or a first and a prospect or a young center is all too accurate, then it doesn't really make sense to me if Pittsburgh is the team getting involved. They've got Ryan Poehling, who I guess you could say is a young center. I mean, he was drafted in 2017, but you talk about all the other guys, I mean, there's Jeff Carter, there's Crosby, there's Malkin. You're not going to really have an easy time prying away a quote-unquote young center from the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think you'd really have to try to focus on draft picks because the Penguins are not going to be too amazing of a team, I feel, especially with the way it's being run right now. So if the Penguins were to maybe fall out of the playoff race, maybe slip a little bit in the standings for 2024, it would make a little bit of sense to me if they fell out and they had a draft pick that was sort of valuable there. Of course, you know that with Malkin, Crosby, Letang on the roster, they're likely not going to ever go down a path where they explore that type of a season. They don't want to go out there and tank. They want to still keep on making the playoffs and persisting with that level of success because all these guys are really talented, so they're not going to want to jeopardize any of that. So if there is a Penguins trade, I really don't know if they have the assets to get it done, especially if you're going to be aiming for players in and of itself rather than just draft picks. However, we did say earlier on that the Canucks have been seemingly allergic to getting draft picks, especially when it comes to JT Miller. They really wanted to get that young center, which to me, it's kind of interesting because if you wanted the young center, you could just trade away Miller, get worse, and lose out, get Bedard in the draft. That guy's a center, isn't he? And if you don't, you get Fantilli too. Like, lots of planning inconsistencies, I feel, with the Vancouver Canucks, but this hit kind of goes out there and solidifies that. The Canucks are eager, or they were eager, willing, ready to move Miller, and it didn't end up manifesting itself. However, if there is some sort of a trade for Miller sometime in the summer, then we'll see. July 1st is the day that everything kicks in, and the Canucks have themselves the opportunity to move Miller before then, so I don't know. Is it going to happen? You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below whether or not you think Miller is actually going to get traded. I feel, personally, it feels too good to be true. Like, all the stuff about Seravalli and the conversations heading into the trade deadline about Miller, etc., it feels so disappointing to see him still on the team, kicking around, and admittedly scoring some pretty good points. Like, I mean, he's playing well with Petey under Rick Tocchet. Of course, I'm not going to say that he's been playing bad as of late, but just still seeing him here, it kind of takes away a lot of hope that I had for this Canucks management and being able to get assets for Miller in the first place. Plus the Filip Hronek deal, which ended up giving the Canucks even more cap headaches. I know Hronek's a good player, but still, that is the language that I'm going to use. But either way, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Frank Seravalli and the comments that he made on Sportsnet 650, how that contradicts what he had written about in this article on dailyfaceoff.com earlier last week. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.